Coming up this week on Sporting Journal Radio.
Release them, use forward-facing sonar to track their movement.
So we just took the underwater ROV camera and we flew it around, and we did find a number of dead fish.
Different things that are going on with each individual fish.
We watched them go down to the depth they were caught at, and some of them stayed there.
I fish, I hunt, and always will. Broadcasting from the Eau Claire Outdoors Studios. Presented by OnX. Know where you stand with OnX. We're not just a radio show anymore. This is Sporting Journal Radio. Welcome to Sporting Journal Radio. I'm Bret Amundson. Thanks for tuning in on the network by demand, sportingjournalradio.com, or maybe you're watching this on YouTube. That's Dan Amundson right there. Dan, what's up?
We're up north.
Yeah, if you're watching this, you'll notice we're not in the studio right now. We're at Fortune Bay Casino, and right behind this awesome Toyota Tundra right here with this beautiful new wrap, the logoing that Jamie Dittman did. You'll hear more about Jamie doing that next week here on this show. In fact, you'll get to see him doing it as well. But right behind it is the finish line for the Arrowhead Ultra 135 race. Dan, this is 135 miles from International Falls to Fortune Bay Casino. It's one of the hardest, it's been ranked one of the hardest races in the world.
How many times in the last 2 days have I said I'm so glad we're filming, not running or competing? Yes. Most of the time we film an event or film whatever we do for Prairie Sportsman, and I get kind of jealous. I want to do what we're filming.
Yeah.
This is not one of them.
People have 60 hours to go 135 miles on the Arrowhead Trail. There's a couple other trails that they utilize as part of this as well, but they can bike it, they can walk it, pulling a little sled behind them, or they could ski it. Now, there's no skiers this year because snow conditions were garbage, but so most of the guys biked it or walked it, and a lot of people drop out in this race. A lot of people don't finish it.
I can understand why.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard. It's cold. Usually it's cold. It was raining last night. It was like 30 degrees and raining and snowing, and you don't just get a hotel. Well, I guess some people can get a hotel room, like Mel George's. A lot of people don't. A lot of people finished in, not a lot, but some people finished in a little under about 24 hours. Yeah. 135 miles on bike. And no thanks.
It was raining, snowing, sleeting. Right. The wind picked up. So we stayed at Mel George's last night on Elephant Lake, and part of the trail comes across the lake. And you're in the woods, you're kind of protected. And then the racers were telling us they come out on that lake and they got hit in the face with this 20+ mile an hour wind. And man, just some brutal conditions. But a couple of years ago, it was 40 below when they did this. So overall, I think they'll take the temps, even though the trail conditions weren't the best.
The walkers will probably take the temps. Bikers would probably want it cold. But it sounded like trail conditions improved today, so a lot of people are finishing up. And we're heading home, but it's a cool event to see, cool event to learn about.
And we filmed it for Prairie Sportsman, so watch that coming up later this season on Prairie Sportsman, probably in April, I think we talked about.
I think it's slated for April.
All right, so we got a lot to get to. In fact, I know last week we talked about trying to get to some of the barotrauma discussion, and we ran out of time on last week's show. So we've got more barotrauma talk this week. In fact, we went out and filmed with the DNR and Jeremy Smith and Mike Hehner and the guys from Lindner Media. Billy Lindner was there, and some of the other guys. And we've got some of those interviews coming for you this week on the show.
Yep, right now.
As a matter of fact, Dan, tell us who our sponsors are this week.
Lake of the Woods Tourism. Lake of the Woods is the walleye capital. Plan a trip to Lake of the Woods at lakeofthewoodsmn.com. Minnesota Deer and Turkey Classic is March 8th, 9th, and 10th at Canterbury Park and Shakopee. Learn more at mndeerclassic.com. Haybell Heights Campground and Resort. Fish out of a snow bear on Devil's Lake. Learn more at haybellheights.com. And Prairie Sportsman, the new season is underway. You get to watch those episodes anytime at the Prairie Sportsman YouTube channel.
Lake of the Woods, the walleye capital of the world, is calling out to you. From the northwest angle to the South Shore and Rainy River, this is the Midwest's #1 ice fishing destination. Walleyes, sauger, perch, northern pike, and eelpout. The fishing on Lake of the Woods is like a world of its own. Experience the most amazing fishing through one of the many full-service resorts featuring heated fish houses, ice transportation, meal plans, and sleeper fish house options. For more information, go to lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
All right, this is Sporting Journal Radio. I'm Bret Amundson. Thanks for tuning in on the network by demand, sportingjournalradio.com, or by watching this on YouTube. And if you are watching this, you'll see we're not in the studio right now. We're out here on a lake in northern Minnesota, and we're doing some more research on barotrauma. Well, we're kind of doing the research. We're really just trying to document the research that the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources is doing. Angling Buzz has been a part of it, and Jeremy Smith joins us right now. Jeremy, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, this is kind of a cool project to get a hold of. So one of the things that I think is neat about the work that they're doing out here is that this was really driven by stakeholders. So Minnesota has a number of work groups, typically species specific. So the panfish work group had been raising concerns about this for quite some time. So they were able to do some collaboration with the DNR and develop a preliminary study or a pilot project last year to dive into this to see how it might work. And then this year now they're doing a little bit more of a refined approach to the study. So what we saw out here was interesting to say the least, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And before we get into what we've seen, and obviously there's going to be a lot of compiling of data and sifting through it a little bit, before we get into that, I want you to talk a little bit about the panfish work groups a little bit, because, you know, as people that have followed this podcast know, you know, you guys put a video out, Aaron Weeb put a video out, then you came on the podcast, and Aaron Weeb came on the podcast, and then there was another Past Bar podcast that Aaron was just on, and a lot of those guys didn't know anything about these work groups, because Aaron was talking about how, well, why aren't more people involved with what the DNR is doing? And in fact, that is kind of what's happening here.
Yeah, it is. It is a good example of the agency working with the stakeholders on this. I mean, that's part of the role of the DNR, is to get citizen input and, you know, manage the resources that the public and the license holders want them to be managed. So this isn't necessarily designed to have a, you know, we want to change regs because of this or that, but certainly right now it's a great educational piece to show anglers and what, you know, what can happen from targeting fish in deep water. And as part of one of the work groups, you and I are on one of those that's involved with technology. So, you know, we know from that catching fish can still be difficult, as it was yesterday morning, even with great anglers and great technology, but at the same time, when it happens, it can happen really quick. So I think we just need to be aware of what's happening as more and more anglers become very good at using this technology and what the implications could be for the future of fisheries.
And there's no question that legislation can come out of nowhere. I know that is a worry from a lot of people. It's a worry for me. We saw it with crossbows last year, where all of a sudden a couple legislators took a couple of words out of a state statute, and boom, crossbows were allowed during the entire archery season. So we're all a little bit worried about that, but that has nothing to do with what we're doing here. We're just trying to learn a little bit more about barotrauma, fishing crappies deep, and of course forward-facing sonar. We all know that helps you find fish. I mean, it's an incredible tool out there.
Well, man, the way we used it in part of this was we caught fish just to see what would happen with, there's no additional handling with keeping them in a pen, just to catch them, release them, use forward-facing sonar to track their movements, and we saw some interesting stuff happen yesterday. We couldn't keep track of every fish for a really long period of time. We saw fish go right back down and seem to be with the school and be all right. We saw fish go right back down and then reach a certain depth and then kind of flutter down. We saw fish float back up. So the technology will really show you a lot, and I hope that whatever they learn from this study, that the citizens and the license holders will be able to say, all right, this is the information we have, this is how we think we should manage the resource, along with this information and input from the agency.
Yeah, and just going back to that panfish work group a little bit, I mean, that's where the QBI and QSI came out of, right? So the Quality Bluegill Initiative, or Quality Sunfish Initiative, and so bluegills were a big part of what this panfish work group really tried to bring awareness to, and putting some different limits on trophy bluegill lakes and lowering limits and things like that. And they did a couple experimental lakes first, and then they expanded it, and they're going through all that research now, and now we're trying to learn a little bit more about crappies. Yeah,
so that was one of the things that they were able to be successful with, that group. So Mike Hehner, who's here, and Dave Weitzel, you know, a few guys here actually work on that work group. And so bluegills were a big concern, because as Minnesotans know, that we used to have some really great big bluegill fisheries, and it is really rare to find big bluegills these days. So hopefully with what they're doing, they'll be able to restore or maintain a number of the quality sunfish lakes that we have, and we'll see now what this means for crappies going forward. They're different kinds of fish, and they do, you know, need to be managed differently just from their life history. So it'll be interesting to see what this shows us.
After being out here for the last couple of days this year, And after doing the study last year and everything that you learned and the methodology that was used last year, things were a little different this year.
Yeah, there was. So I mean, they did, I should say, somewhat of a control on what, so it was very similar to what we did last year. Catch the fish, move them over. We tried to expedite the handling time in between the catch and being put in the net. So there's that group of fish that just went into a net, just as you would regularly release them, but they are contained in a hoop net that goes from the surface to the bottom. And then another set was placed in there with a descending device to see if the fish can get back to depth. Maybe there's a higher rate of survival, or we'll see. I mean, that's what we're here to find out. And then, of course, there was the other side of it where we just caught them and let them go and tried to gather whatever data you possibly could from observing them on forward-facing and looking for them with an underwater drone.
And then we saw a few fish up under the ice with that drone.
Yeah, we did. So that was pretty cool. We had a couple forward-facing sonar units looking the underwater drone. We tried to do our best. It's hard to, steer that thing, but we did our best to really grid off an area. Mike could kind of see what the field of view was, so we had a good sense of what ground we'd covered. A couple times we did run into the same fish, but we could see somebody was walking above the drone with a GPS unit marking waypoints where we saw the fish. So we feel real confident that the fish that we saw with the drone were all individual fish, and we weren't getting repeats of any of those.
Well, I think it's a really important study, and that's why we're out here filming it for Prairie Sportsman and obviously talking about it here on Sporting Journal Radio. And we're going to have our episode come out this spring, and you'll be able to see how this story took, how it unfolded. And also Dan and I did some deep water fishing, and we're going to cook those fish up. So we're fishing this deep. We're not putting them back. We're going to keep them. So you'll be able to see that, and then we'll be able to see another Angling Buzz video. Yeah,
this next winter, we've got our content kind of scheduled out for the remainder of the ice season this year, but we'll have that out next year, probably one of the first things since it's a hot topic. But the idea here is really just to let everybody know that there are certainly risks with fishing in deep water, and this is my opinion, but what I've seen doing this fishing and with this research, that it makes a lot of sense to me that if you're going to target fish in deep water, it's probably best, again, to just use this as a harvest opportunity, not necessarily recreational fishing to see how many you can put on top of the ice or how many you can catch and let go.
Well, and you guys have some data to go through and kind of figure things out, so that'll take a little bit of time after this. So I'm excited to see what you guys come up with, and this has really been a really interesting study to be a part of. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh man, thanks for coming. This was really fun. So it's great we were able to be involved in this type of thing.
All right. Jeremy Smith, thank you very much.
You bet.
852 million acres of public land, 147 million private properties, all in the palm of your hand. The #1 hunting GPS app just got better. With hundreds of custom map layers, 3D and topographic maps, you can easily scout on the road or at home before you go. And now you can get important weather details, CWD detection, and even know what crops have been planted where. Get the most trusted hunting GPS app ever made. OnX. Know where you stand with OnX.
All right, we're back. Sporting Journal Radio. I'm Bret Amundson. Thanks for tuning in on the radio network, by demand, wherever you get your favorite podcasts or watching this on YouTube. We're on a lake here in northern Minnesota, and we're with the assistant to the regional manager, Northeast.
Yep, up in Grand Rapids.
The assistant to the assistant. What was that old office joke? The assistant, no, not the assistant manager. This is terrible. Anyway, Dave Weitzel, he's with the DNR up here in northern Minnesota, and he knows his fish, and that's what we're talking about right now. You've been a part of panfish management in Minnesota. And obviously there's been a lot of bluegill discussion the last few years and some special regulations and things like that. And now we're just trying to learn about crappies. This isn't to set any regulations or anything like that. We're just trying to learn a little bit about them, fishing them deep, and what effect barotrauma has on these fish.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, we heard kind of loud and clear from our panfish anglers that the next thing they'd like us to focus on is crappie. And we realized that, crappie are found throughout the state of Minnesota, but they live in a huge variety of habitats. So their population dynamics really vary tremendously from one lake to another. And the type of management that might work well in one environment might not work so well in another environment. So we're trying to learn a little bit more about their biology and about how different lake environments might affect angling. So we're out here on a deep lake today, and we want to understand how does deep water angling impact the crappie population, and what kind of guidelines can we come up with for anglers to help them make a more informed decision when they're out on the water.
And that's the biggest thing, is we just want to educate, or you just want to educate people so they can learn about what effect they might be having on these fish, particularly if they're trying to catch and release fish in deep water. You started a study. You did a study last year on this. You're bringing it back again this year with a few changes this year.
Yep, correct. Yeah, so we kind of expanded on last year's work. The main point of last year's work was just to see if something like this can even be done in the wintertime. Traditionally, these barotrauma studies have happened during the open water period when you have the mobility of being able to work out of a boat. You don't have freezing conditions that you're dealing with. So it's just kind of an easier setting in some ways to do this kind of work. So last year we wanted to see if we could even come out and set net pens. Could we catch enough fish? Could we keep gear from freezing in? And we found out that we could. And we were able to do it on 3 different lakes with 3 different depth trials, which started to provide some provocative information that we wanted to continue to follow up on. So this year we're out on a lake that's even a little bit deeper than what we've tried in the past, angling in depths between 35 and about 50 feet of water, and trying really several different methods to evaluate what's going on with the fish. The first method that we're using is catching fish and holding them in pens like we did last year. That way we can recover the fish. In this case, we waited 48 hours to lift the pens and determine over that amount of time how many fish have we lost. The first pen we just put fish in much like we did last year, released them directly into the pen. The second pen, we actually wanted to see if we use the descending device, if that would have much of an impact, for a couple different reasons. First, we hear anglers ask us questions about descending devices or fizzing to see if there's safer ways to release a fish. So we could evaluate that, but we could also try to eliminate any confounding factor of the pen itself. Last year we observed that some fish had trouble getting to depth because they'd run into that net. So we thought, well, if we place them there, that kind of eliminates that risk to the fish, so it should give us a little better question, or a little bit better answer, I should say. And then we followed that up by using some really awesome technologies. And, I want to say thank you to our media partners that came out and actually provided some forward-facing sonar units for us, and also some underwater drones. So we were able to catch fish yesterday and just release them like we would on any day out in the ice, and then track those fish with forward-facing sonar and see how they reacted, and then come out today and use an underwater drone to see if we could observe any mortalities. So kind of a 3-pronged approach to this study this year.
Yeah, we had live scopes and Lowrance units and Humminbird units all over the place, tracking fish and working together in coordination to try to track the same fish from different angles. So if it went off one screen, another one was trying to track it as well. And with, we'll get all the details are going to come out as we go on. We're still compiling the data, but when you saw that part of the research, that part of the study, was there anything that surprised you or anything that you saw there that stood out?
Yeah, the crew's actually working up the fish right now, so we're going to have to dig into the numbers, but just general observation, it seemed like about a third of the fish were floating in each of the net pens. So it didn't seem like the descending device made much of a difference. Both of those pens looked the same. And interestingly enough, when the crew came out today and used the underwater drone, they found that about a third of the fish that were captured yesterday, they actually found pinned up underneath the ice. So it seemed like regardless of which method was used, we were finding a similar number of fish that were that weren't able to maintain their depth and were pinned up near the surface. And then both in the pens, in both pens, and also just out here on the open ice, we observed some fish that had apparently died and actually sank to the bottom.
Yeah.
So some fish seem to be released and they swim down and they do just fine. Some fish are released and then end up floating back to the surface, and some fish seem to swim down to depth only to find themselves laying on the bottom. So there's definitely different things that are going on with each individual fish.
And these were some deep waters that we were fishing in,
they were
deeper than last year.
Yep.
And I know Jake Wallace was here fishing, and he caught one. I don't know what the depth was, but when he brought it up, it was dead. Pretty much dead when he brought it. Like, he just caught it, reeled it up, put it on the ice, and it was toast. That's wild. Like, that's pretty crazy to me. So we don't have final numbers or final tallies on any of this stuff yet. This is just kind of observations that we've had on what these fish have experienced out here today. But it was really interesting taking that underwater drone out there and seeing those fish pinned up against the bottom of the ice. I mean, it's something you hear about, but without that sort of tech, it's hard to actually see it.
Yeah, and and I'm as guilty as anybody. When I've been fishing, I release a fish and say, well, that fish swam down. I'm sure it was fine. So it was extremely informative to be able to use the forward-facing sonar and track these fish for, in some cases, we were able to track them up to 5 minutes or more. And what we found is there was a delay between the point of that fish descending to depth and where it really started showing signs of trouble and floated back to the surface. So I don't think that in most cases that mortality is instant. It probably occurs after that fish, at least makes an effort to return to depth. But yeah, if you're, I think that fish yesterday that was stone cold dead, I think that was caught in like 50 feet of water. Obviously some fish are just instantly killed, but probably that delayed mortality is more common. Yeah. At least that's what that forward-facing sonar suggested to us yesterday.
And we did even see one fish pop up back in one of the holes when we were out there. It was frozen in one of yesterday's holes. So,
and the fish in the pens kind of reacted the same. When we put them in the non-descending device pen, those fish seemed to initially swim down, and it was 3, 4, 5 minutes later that they started to come back up to the surface.
And I think it's also important to note that this research is ongoing. You're gonna continue to do this. You're gonna continue to try different methods and try to get the best results possible. That's the bottom line. You're just trying to find the best results.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. So we're hoping to add a little bit more precision where we can come up with some somewhat precise estimates of mortality at given depth. But it'll take more data and more time to do that. But between now and then, I think what we found, first off, it is pretty consistent with those open water studies that have been done that shows that barotrauma doesn't just magically exist at a single depth, but at least the mortality that's associated with barotrauma increases exponentially the deeper that you go. Right. We kind of saw the same thing out here with these fish that were caught out of deeper water than last year's study. And it seemed like, with both those studies and what we're finding, it seems like you start seeing signs of trouble at about 30 feet. So maybe for us, that's kind of that beginning of the danger zone where if we're out fishing at 30 feet or more, maybe we take a cautious approach. Maybe we get in those depths of 40 or 50 feet, and that's where we're really extremely careful.
And keeping the fish you catch.
Well, and that's, personally, that's what I choose to do anyway. When I release a fish, and I do a lot of catch and release fishing, but I want to know that fish was handled well, and there's a very high chance that fish is going to survive. When I'm fishing in depths greater than 30 feet, I don't have that confidence anymore. So those are the times where personally, I'm going to go out and I like to eat a meal of fish, so I have no problem harvesting a few. Once I get the number of fish I want for a meal, I usually head up a little shallower and find some bluegills myself.
Sure. One thing I also want to mention is you guys took great steps to really reduce the fish handling time.
We did. Yeah, we were able to get these fish. We were actually shuttling them over to the net pens using snowmobiles. So a lot of times we were, from the time the fish was caught to the point where it was in the pen was around 30 seconds. So we were moving pretty fast. We made a real effort to cut that handling time down. And then obviously with the fish from yesterday, those fish were immediately released.
No measurements, no clipping of fins or nothing.
No, down the hole they went, and yet still, with the forward-facing sonar, we were able to show that some of those fish still struggled, and we're able to confirm with the drone that some of those fish didn't make it.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line is we're just trying to find the answers, trying to figure out what effects barotrauma have, also trying to come up with better fish handling methods. And we all love catch and release, right? But maybe it's just once you hit a certain depth, it's just not an option that should be utilized because of what barotrauma has the ability to do to these fish caught up 30 feet or deeper or something.
Yeah, or if you do want to go fishing on a day where you're not interested in a meal of fish, maybe you just choose not to fish in those deep waters and go after something else a little bit shallower. Yep.
Now, do you have more of these research days planned this year? Maybe different water depths, or
we're really hoping to, but for folks that have been ice fishing, you probably have noticed we're having a really weird winter weather-wise. Yeah. So we're not sure what the ice conditions are going to allow us to do. We would like to do some trials on some lakes in southern Minnesota that are shallower lakes, but with the warm up in the forecast, I'm not sure what we can safely do. But it's safe to say that we're going to continue the study, at least until the point where we're able to have some confidence in our observations and continue to work with our media partners to get good messaging out so anglers can make informed decisions.
What about doing some in open water?
It would be interesting. We haven't really talked about it, but it's something that we could certainly look at. Like I say, it has been done for multiple species. We'd probably start and look at what's been done specifically with crappie. If there's some good studies that are out there, there's probably no need to necessarily repeat those studies. Yeah. But that would be a good starting point. And if we find that there isn't a lot out there, maybe that's the next step.
Well, I know the nets have become a point of concern for a lot of people, and I've seen that studies in South Dakota, barotrauma studies, they've used the exact same nets. Yep. So those nets have been used in a lot of studies, and if you wanted to say that maybe that is a variable that could taint all those studies out there, maybe is there some sort of net in open water, because you got to be able to track the fish. Yeah. You have to, whether it's a clip fin or whatever, which I don't think the clip fin was a big deal, but in an open water where you had like a narrow, this would be a big undertaking, but a lot of people have suggested trying to have some sort of net that gets wider at the bottom so fish can take that natural gradual descent if they need it. Would that even be a possibility? Is there something like that out there? Could it be built? You guys got handy people at the DNR?
It's possible, and I know when we've done open water studies, we have used a much larger pen that was 6 foot by 6 foot square. The problem is it gets to the point where to try to retrieve that net at depth and do it in a safe way, there's a human safety factor too.
Oh, sure.
Where it becomes extremely difficult to do that, especially out of a moving boat. So we'd really have to look into the feasibility of that. But the bottom line is, anytime you're putting fish into a containment, you're adding an extra stressor to that fish's life, and there's really no way to mitigate that. So maybe there's some other methods that could be looked at. One way to do it would be to catch a bunch of fish and then tag them with either like a numbered tag or a pit tag,
but
tag.
Even those, even there you're kind of stabbing the fish, right?
And that's the problem, is we're still inducing some kind of an additional stressor to the fish. Yeah.
Can you give them name tags? Just like you get like the stickers,
Yeah, that would be great. My name is Bob.
Well,
but maybe we can further develop the forward-facing sonar stuff too. If there was ways that we could track fish longer, I think with some of the new technologies that are out there, it's opening the door to all kinds of possibilities that we haven't had in the past.
Yeah. Well, again, I think the thing is we're just trying to do what's best for the fisheries and what's best for anglers that utilize those fisheries.
Yep.
And inform and educate. So Dave Weitzel, appreciate the time. Good luck with the future studies, and thanks for letting us be out here.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you.
Ice fishing season is here. This winter, plan a trip to Devils Lake, North Dakota. Not only will you have the chance to catch their legendary perch, but this year, Hay Bale Heights has been catching big walleye after big walleye. And they're doing it from a mobile, comfortable snow bear. No matter how cold it is outside, you're warm and toasty on the inside. Learn more and book a trip today at haybaleheights.com. That's haybaleheights.com. Don't miss the 2024 Minnesota Deer and Turkey Classic, presented by Select Heartland Chevy Dealers at Canterbury Park in Shakopee, March 8th, 9th, and 10th. This year's Classic features top hunting celebrities like Pat Nicole Reeve of Driven TV, Melissa Bachman of Winchester Deadly Passion TV, and legendary bow hunter Barry Weitzel. Get your antlers scored, view more than 300 antler entries, and see the latest hunting products, plus a great lineup of lodges and outfitters. Learn more about the Minnesota Deer and Turkey Classic, March 8th, 9th, and 10th at Canterbury Park in Shakopee at mndeerclassic.com.
This is Sporting Journal Radio. I'm Bret Amundson. Thanks for tuning in on YouTube, maybe downloading the podcast or listening to this on the radio network. We're out here on the lake in northern Minnesota, continuing the Barotrauma research with Mike Hehner right now from Lindner Media. Mike, how you doing?
Doing good. How about you?
Not bad. This has been interesting these last couple of days.
Really fun. Yeah, it's this has always been an interest of mine for many years to find out what is actually happening with fish in deep water, all fish, but crappies in particular. And kind of what we're seeing out here is what you would think would happen. So, but yeah, definitely it was neat seeing fish from really deep water to mid-depth to see what happened to them when they came up. So,
I think I saw some of the stuff that was done with the nets and the descending device, and then obviously we had live scope and forward-facing sonars out here. But you had an underwater drone out here today. That's kind of fun.
Yeah. We just thought, how do you verify if the fish you immediately let go lived, right? And thought, some of them might sink to the bottom, but a lot of them we know float up. And do they float up and sit under the ice and recover later? Very possibly. Or do they float up and die? So we just thought we caught a bunch of the fish we immediately released in one little area, so we just took the underwater ROV camera and we flew it around, and we did find a number of dead fish, came right up on them, and they were just stiff and dead under the ice. So it was a percentage of what we actually released. So,
and this year versus last year, some of the methods have been refined, and it won't stop here. It's going to continue to happen, and methodology will continue to be
correct.
refined.
Yeah, and there's I guess talking to all the biologists too, there's so much variability in what happens with critters, right? I mean, you can't you just don't get a hard and fast, it's either this or this, so there's going to be a lot of variables. But I think we did refine a bunch from last year and took notes on a bunch of stuff that we thought we could improve on, and did it 3 different ways, so we have a bunch of different ways to look at what happened with the fish. So,
and biggest thing is education and getting some messaging out that this is what we're seeing when you fish deep.
No doubt about it. I mean, that's always been my thought from what we do and what you do. It's like, we're not trying to say something's right or wrong. We just want to know if something's happening to let other anglers know, so that when they're going out, they have it in their mind that, hey, for these crappies, if you're fishing them super, super deep, there's probably a good chance there's going to be some dying. If you fish them shallower, probably not so much. So it's like just I don't know about you, but I run into a lot of guys out on the ice that it doesn't even enter into their mind that they're killing a fish.
Yeah.
Right, it's like if I'm catching a fish in 10 feet or 50 feet, it's probably fine if I let it go, and if it swims away, you think it's fine, but it might not be. So that's what we're just trying to get a little bit more detail to get to the bottom of, what amount of fish might be possibly dying.
Well, it was interesting because all the fish that you found that have floated up under the ice today.
Correct.
They were all caught here yesterday. There was nobody else out here fishing.
Right.
And all those fish, every fish that was caught there was followed with a live scope down to the bottom?
Correct.
Or so?
I would say, the numbers.
I don't remember the numbers, but
there was a handful for sure that went down 2-3 feet, and we seen them swim maybe 20 feet under the ice and pop back up.
So they never made it to the bottom.
Never made it down. There was a handful or a number of them that went down. We watched them go down to the depth they were caught at, and some of them stayed there. Some of them went below that. It was almost like they went to the bottom. And then there were some of them that went down, up, and down, up, and we, tracked them with the live scope for over 100 feet for 5 minutes, and they were still kind of trying to right themselves. So maybe they did, maybe they didn't. So, but the fact that we caught 40 plus fish, doing that, just catch, instantly release with the live scope, and then came back the next day.
No measurements,
no, nothing. It was just the immediate release. And there we found 11 fish under the ice. So that's, do the math, but and to be fair, like the fish that we did out here, you were there watching it too, they were deeper than we had planned. So we were actually, guys were catching fish in 60 feet of water, and the fish were 50 feet down. So that's deep.
Yeah.
45. A lot of them were 40, 45, which most anglers probably do not, fish for crappies that deep. I mean, there's a number of lakes in Minnesota where you have that
Most of the time I don't fish deeper than 15 feet.
Right.
Just because the lakes I live by don't get any deeper than that.
But I mean, I can think of growing up a handful of lakes, even down in the cities. We were fishing in 48 feet of water, and the crappies were at 42 feet. And you just, when they pulled them up, you just kept them because you knew they weren't going to live. Yeah. So, and with these ones here, this is, I think, gave us a good example of, it was good to see some deep fishes. I guess what I'm getting at, that whatever 25 to 35 feet is sort of getting into that zone where we don't know, right? Yeah. So, but when you get below 35 feet, it's, there's more pressure, and, logic would say more are going to probably die, but again, we got to find out. So
it was interesting to see a bluegill came out of 50 some feet of water that was down on the bottom.
Correct.
And a couple of rock bass that we've seen.
Yeah.
So a lot of fish living down in that, and most of the schools that we saw on the electronics were, you'd see the odd fish come through, or a little school of fish come through around 30 feet, 25 to 30 feet, but most of the big schools of crappies that we were seeing were down, 45 plus feet deep.
Right.
So, I normally wouldn't target a fish that deep, of course, but that was the whole idea, was to come out here and fish these fish. And Jake caught one that was dead when he brought it up out of 50 some feet of water.
Right.
Dead when he got it, still hooked and dead. So, results were interesting, of course, and I just was kind of fascinated by seeing those fish that had floated back up and seeing them under the ice like that.
Right. And another variable I guess we need to consider when you're just getting into more variables is, this is a lake that rarely gets fished, right? Like a few people from camp come out, so they're pretty much untouched fish. And we came out here as a big group and we cut around, and the fish did seem to know we were here, right? Would you agree? It was like you would drill on the fish and watch them with the forward-facing sonar, and they would go deeper. So it's like, were they at 30 feet and they saw us?
Sure.
They went down to 40 feet and then we caught them and then brought them up. So maybe they weren't as, that's the other thing. It's like they did, with this technology, which is, by the way, the technology is so cool, right? It's fun. As an angler, it's awesome to use. You learn a lot, and we're kind of learning as we're doing this study stuff too, what it can, help you, but it tells you stuff we didn't know before, like how these fish move on top. When we're up top and they're down there, they know we're here.
Yeah.
And it's just about how much we affect what they do when we're fishing for them even. So
it was funny that first day I got here and you guys had already started, and somebody had mentioned that to me. Boy, these fish are really spooky. It's not a private lake, but there's no public access on it here, so there's obviously not a lot of fishing pressure. Only a handful of
super
cabins.
light. Yeah.
So to me, I immediately I'm thinking like, this is like Canada. I'm on a lake in Canada where there's hardly any fishing pressure. This is going to be easy. And somebody mentioned right away that these fish are spooking off of everything, which I was surprised by. And the way it was being done the first day is when somebody would catch a fish, the sled would come pick it up, bring it over, try to minimize that handling time as much as possible. And I'd be working a fish, I'd be like, all right, and then meow, and the sled would go, the snowmobile would come ripping by, and that fish would be like, poof,
gone.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy.
Right? Yeah. God. No, that's another point too, like flying that underwater drone, like I took it all the way to the bottom in 50 just to look for dead fish, and it was really hard. You're just not covering much ground. But when we brought it down to 50 feet, there was live rock bass just hanging out. Like that's where they were, in 50 feet of water on the bottom. But coming up and running it at mid depth, like I could point it up at the ice and look for fish, and I could see people walking. It's like we have 6 inches of snow cover and a foot of ice, right? And it's like, and it's an overcast day, but I could see people moving and walking around up there. It's like, it's amazing. I mean, I would have never guessed that. So I think, again,
they're seeing us.
They're seeing us, and with crappies, that's maybe why it's a lot of times can be better at night, because that you lose that part of it, or they get a little less wary. But yeah, it's crazy how well you can see things moving on top of the ice with snow cover. You wouldn't think so. So that was another learning thing. So that's
another. I mean, the technology is helping us. learn and understand the fish so much better that we're theoretically becoming better anglers because of it.
Right.
The technology is not catching the fish again, but it's allowing us to learn fish behavior and learn not just how to catch them better, but when not to catch them, or when they're doing this or what their numbers are at. I mean, we can with the live scope, we can count the number of fish that are in a school.
Right.
I mean, you could like do creel surveys almost, or try to determine how many fish.
Population.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Population estimates by. I mean, obviously there's some variables and you got to be able to follow the school around, but you could literally count schools of fish down there with this stuff. So
right.
It's fun. I love it. And I know there's going to be more research coming and more studies and more days like this, and it's just going to continue to get better and better. And I really appreciate you letting us come out and tag team with you.
Oh man, yeah, no, I think the more people we get just talking about this, the better. And the more media people that are involved. Being in the panfish group myself, this had been coming up for a number of years. What different things should we look at? And everybody kept saying, let's talk about deep water crappies. And then these guys, the Minnesota DNR, were like, okay, we're going to put our heads together and figure out a way to do that. So and we're just like, okay, well, you do that and we'll film it and try to do our best to show it how what's happening. So there's a lot more to come, it sounds like, from them. So this is just the start of this big study, so we'll keep tabs on it, I guess, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure after you finished last year, you had some ideas for this year, even before other people probably suggested things. You probably had some ideas of how you want to do things different. And now that we're kind of wrapping up this one, I bet you go, oh no, I should do it a little bit this. We'll do it a little different next time and do this. Let's try this.
No, and I actually enjoyed getting input. I had every one of my friends that watched everything that's been out there the last year came at me with 1,000 ideas, and a lot of them we had already said, this could be an issue, or this could be, or this. But other ones are like, I never thought of that. That's another good thing to think about. So I think as anglers, that's what we're good at, is figuring things out, and this is the process for doing this stuff.
So feel free to comment below on what suggestions you might have. We're always willing to listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mike, thank you very much.
Sounds good. It's been a pleasure.
Sporting Journal Radio is a division of Macaba LLC. If you've got a question, comment, or story idea for us, send us an email. Go to sportingjournalradio.com. While you're there, you can learn how to advertise on the show and visit our store for hats, hoodies, coffee mugs, and more. Go to sportingjournalradio.com.